Thank you very much. I don't want to take a lot of your time. I know you are tired, and I'm happy to be the last of the session today, the last person. Of course, I'm not going to repeat whatever we already know and whatever has been discussed in this room today. So I will go straight forward to the message I want to communicate. Do you know how? Okay, this one. So what do we know at this point? We know that indigenous peoples spread are in different countries. They manage important ecosystems, protect biodiversity, etc. I'm not going to repeat this. I know we all know about this information. We all know about indigenous knowledge and the different interrelated levels in which indigenous knowledge is spread and the foundational elements ranging from local to global level and practices, worldviews, etc. But there is an important topic that I would like to attract your attention, and is we have been listening about different aspects of how indigenous peoples, indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous science overlap with Western science. But have you thought by any chance in any of the examples we have been listening today, the Chad example, the examples of the Maasai in Africa, that the majority of the methodologies used, despite the examples from indigenous knowledge or indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, the majority of the methods and tools used for collecting this data comes from Western methodologies for data collection. So let me explain a little bit and give you more detail about what I'm trying to say today. So what do we probably don't know? Little has been said today about how indigenous peoples were among the first to observe and understand complex processes on Earth, to notice changes in natural phenomena, and to gain critical knowledge to adapt to environmental and climate changes. This information is not only locally based, it's also global, and just by a coincidence, I'm using the same images the astronomer used this evening. And the similarities that these two different knowledge systems might bring for understanding a biophysical system on the planet. For example, I'm from a Mayan community, and indigenous Maya from Mexico, they were very good astronomers, mathematicians. They were able to understand the water cycle very well. Actually, we call in the Mayas as a water-oriented society, because they were able to adapt to critical conditions in an area in which water is scarce. And this information that we can obtain and we can gain from indigenous scientific thought can be combined with other methodologies, including global Earth observations. For example, we have now this global satellite data, which combines different data from the Earth's surface and atmosphere through remote sensing instruments. This Earth observation-based water quality information can combine satellite data, unmanned aerial vehicle, and in situ water sampling of optical properties and water quality parameters. So indigenous peoples have been collecting and reporting Earth observations and changes on the water cycle and other complex systems on Earth, including coastal erosion, freshwater flows, ocean conditions, sea ice thickness, ice cover, among many others. And to give an example, for example, some hydrologists use isotopic tracers to trace how contaminants move in groundwater reservoirs, but groundwater is very complex. Groundwater systems are very complex, and sometimes we need a lot of time to understand, and tracers do not last very long. So combining or applying an indigenous scientific thought of how the water and the tracers circulate within the system is also important for understanding water quality parameters. So my main point here is that incorporating indigenous knowledge and observations into the development of Earth applications can help us to better understand dynamic Earth conditions and implications of long-term changes. The observations made by indigenous peoples provide a different and rich data set and documentation with high level of detail that is usually not included into global monitoring efforts or global Earth observations. But this information can be correlated to instrumental measurements captured through global Earth observation tools. But now we know different things about indigenous peoples, indigenous knowledge. We probably don't know a lot about indigenous scientific thought. And there are still some myths, concepts, and frequent misconceptions about indigenous knowledge. And I would like just to bring your attention to some of them. One of the first myths is that indigenous knowledge is similar to other knowledge systems. And this is not true. Indigenous peoples confer prominence and superiority to natural world in people's relationship with nature. And this has always been present in many indigenous groups through different philosophies like living in balance or in harmony with modern Earth. But the problem here is that we are talking about two different paradigms. And if we really want to include indigenous knowledge or indigenous science, and if we really want to have a change in society, we really need to include indigenous science methods, tools, and approaches for data collection, for scientific inquiry into the policy-making arenas. Because the two indigenous knowledge systems and Western knowledge systems are completely different in the way they see and perceive nature. We have here the example of the Ailu system of the Andean communities, which is a philosophy rooted in indigenous worldviews. This concept is an understanding of an harmonious humanity relationship with nature. There is another common myth that is the indigenous knowledge of the past is not the same as that of today. This is not true. All indigenous groups have in-depth knowledge of their natural and cultural environments that is place-based, specific, and associated with human usage, stretching back over many generations. However, despite knowledge is transmitted orally and main characteristics remain, the majority of the indigenous groups have also developed and evolved. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge is not important in political and scientific spheres. This is not true because both spheres are pursuing collaborations with indigenous peoples, exploring how their knowledge can complement scientific endeavors, making arguments towards the integration of knowledge. But it is important to think a little bit about, is this integration a good idea? Yes, but probably not the best approach because the majority of the, as already mentioned, the majority of the methodologies come from Western science. So there is a need to recover, restore, and revitalize indigenous methods for data collection and for scientific inquiry. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge is imprecise and difficult to understand. As already mentioned as well, indigenous knowledge provides information, methods, and practices for the conservation and sustainable use of ecosystems and biodiversity. And this information can enrich our understanding of environmental change through ecological assessments and monitoring, etc. But each indigenous group, despite the cultural similarities, we have also our own protocols, methods, and approaches. And unless we include some of them within the scientific community, because it's science which influence policy, we will be able to make this real transformation towards sustainability. For example, indigenous peoples have been able to accurately make measurements, observations, and predictions of natural phenomena. Many of them have not even occurred today, like equinoxes, solstices, and they did so without the technology we have today. And I have different examples, and we have been listening different and diverse examples from all around the world. I have the example here again of the Mayas, that they were able to predict or to understand changes on the weather because they were very good in observing how nature changes, how the weather changes, the changing weather patterns, and considering bioindicators. And this information is similar to other places as well. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge must be combined with Western science. I'm not going to repeat this, but I want to emphasize that this commonly accepted idea can be led to even more erosion of our indigenous knowledge, particularly in groups that have lost important amount of knowledge and language. Combining different knowledge systems to solve environmental problems towards sustainability is rooted sometimes in an inclusive participation, but this perhaps do not lead to construct new knowledge as, at its maximum potential, since these tools and instruments come from Western methodologies and approaches. The romanticization of indigenous knowledge and their manipulation to fit external agendas can create bigger problems, and important environmental knowledge can be lost. I have another example of another philosophy for understanding of a research inquiry, which is the Mi'kmaq knowledge. It's called Two Eye Seeing, which has been used also for embracing learning to see from one eye with the strengths of indigenous knowledge. Another myth is that indigenous knowledge cannot be included in Earth observations due to their poor credibility or accuracy of data collection. This is not true because through intergenerational experience and observations, indigenous peoples were among the first to observe and understand Earth processes, which I already mentioned. And indigenous peoples have been telling us about these histories of interaction with the environment, and we know that it's possible to detect climate variability and its impact. So these knowledge systems can inform understandings of environmental change and adaptation policy. Another myth is that if indigenous knowledge is lost, nothing will happen because we have Western science. And I want to bring this important myth because as we discuss about indigenous knowledge, the majority of us in this room, we are from indigenous communities, but if we lose more indigenous knowledge, we are losing very important knowledge which represents an existential threat to humanity. So my message is emphasizing Western processes rather than recovering using methods and approaches of indigenous peoples for scientific inquiry severely affects their ways of thinking. And it's important to regain, restore, and revitalize such knowledge in order to be able to reestablish indigenous leadership. And this is my main message that I want to bring to all of you. So my final remarks is Earth science must include indigenous knowledge and understandings of the environment into the measuring and monitoring processes. It's ethically and politically correct to include other ways of understanding natural phenomena, especially as the astronomer here mentioned in this day, we only have one planet, and understanding the systems within this planet should be allow us to work together towards such understanding, including indigenous knowledge with other knowledge systems to understand complex processes on the components of the hydrological cycle, for example, will significantly improve the representation and inclusion of locally based water processes into global models, allowing for better decisions to be made at local to global scales. And a real transformation will be possible only by restoring, revitalizing, and recovering such knowledge. Thank you.